Brooke Cunningham. Brooke is the director of the philanthropy director at Neighbor to Neighbor. And we thought that it would be good for us to hear about what all the things that Neighbor to Neighbor is doing in our community, how COVID has impacted them, and a little bit about what $5,400 means to them in terms of being able to help families find housing in Fort Collins. So Brooke, welcome, and we're glad to have you with us.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I'm going to share my screen because I think it just helps us understand a little bit about what Neighbor to Neighbor does. All right. Thank you all so much for having me, and thank you for thinking of Neighbor to Neighbor. You know, it's funny that $5,400 seems like a drop in the bucket when we're talking about these huge numbers, but it really does make such a big difference. And I'll show you how as we go through this. And if anybody has questions as I'm going through this, please don't hesitate to pop it in the chat or ask it. I'm a pretty informal presenter, so definitely like to address things as we go. So I want to give a little bit of a background about Neighbor to Neighbor. We are celebrating 51 years now. We were founded in 1970, and we were really built on just the belief that everybody should have a stable and safe home. And the reason that we really believe that is because home is truly the foundation for opportunity and success. This little image here is a little confusing, I think, but basically this is a bridge to kind of a stable and successful life. And what this shows is if we lose housing, all of these other pieces of our lives suddenly become also in jeopardy. It is a lot harder to stay employed. It's a lot harder for kids to really focus on their education. It's really hard to heal if you have any physical or mental health challenges. So we know that having a safe and stable home is really the foundation for having a really good and successful life and being a valuable member of the community. So that's kind of why Neighbor to Neighbor focuses so much on housing stability. So what does that actually look like? So glad you asked. So really, we provide housing stability all across the housing continuum, all the way from ending homelessness by providing things like housing search assistance and first month's rent assistance to help get folks into housing, through foreclosure prevention. So folks who own their own home and just need that foreclosure. So we'll go into a couple of these actual programs in a little bit more detail, but I think what I really like to show with this slide is that really we have programs that really do span across the entire housing continuum, because we know that there are challenges to stability at several places within the housing continuum, whether you are renting or whether you do own your own home. We do have several service locations in normal times. During COVID, it's all online. Because that's the life that we're living, but we've been really effective at serving the community online, I think. So let's talk a little bit about our biggest program. This is our homelessness and eviction prevention program, which is actually where the funds that you are giving will go to. So in a normal year, what this looks like is folks come into our office and are able to say why they're in jeopardy of being evicted or displaced from their home. And we are able to provide around $350 to keep them housed. In 2019, we prevented homelessness for 663 local families. And the really cool part about this program that I get the most excited about is that 94% of the clients that we're able to get a hold of after 6 months of providing assistance are still in that stable home. So what this tells us is that this really is effective at keeping people housed. So this is why this is really our hallmark program. And again, in a normal year, we distribute around $225,000 in that direct assistance. So when we do provide housing or rent assistance, the checks do go directly to the landlord. And so we have to have an actual lease agreement, and we send the checks right there. So we know that it is truly helping folks stay housed. And we'll talk a little bit more about what it looks like in COVID. Don't worry, I'm not ignoring it. The reason that we really focus on preventing homelessness is because we know that it is a really effective use of community resources. The cost of homelessness can really vary based on how much folks are using community resources, the emergency room, police services, et cetera. But the average is around $20,000 per family per year. So that's the cost to the community. But if we can prevent homelessness for under $1,000 for a family that's just facing some issues and needs a little bit of help staying housed, that is a much better proposition for our whole community. But I think really at the end of the day, it's also such a better proposition for the actual families we're able to help. This little graphic down here, this photo is one of my favorites. This is Tamara, who came in to get some first month's rent assistance. So we actually moved Tamara and her boys into a house with some first month's rent. So it's a really great program and definitely something that makes a big difference in our community. Neighbor to Neighbor also owns 132 affordable units. Most of them are in Fort Collins, but we do have a set of, I think, 12 units in Loveland as well. So we really pride ourselves on being fair and ethical landlords. And we also provide resident services because we know the folks who are living within our properties are in the lower income bracket. So we can help them with things like budgeting, making a resume, setting goals to maybe improve their career prospects, and just taking whatever steps that we can to end the cycle of poverty for the folks living within our units. And I'm very happy to state that we haven't evicted somebody in over, I think, 1.5 years now. So we really try to live the motto of believing in the stable housing and providing that for folks. I just love this story. This is Evan. He's one of our residents, and he actually has a seizure disorder, and he was living in I think it was like a camper that didn't have any heat or running water, and he was having seizures all the time. But as soon as we moved him into housing, which I think was now, this quote's a little old, so it's been 2.5 years, he hasn't had a seizure since. So really proves the fact that having a stable home can have such a dramatic impact on folks' lives. And Evan actually recently joined our board too, so he's one of our board members. And this is another family who lives in our units, the Jaramillo family. I love this story because Dad got hurt at work and he lost his job, and they were living in a motel sometimes and living in their cars sometimes and just in a really unstable situation. And that's Bonifacio on the left, the little kiddo there, and he was really struggling with school. And within a couple of months of them living in a neighbor to neighbor apartment and being in a safe and stable home, he all of a sudden was getting straight A's. He was in advanced math and English where he was failing before. So I just love that story. I just love to hear these successes and the difference that we made in Bonifacio's life. And he actually was such a trooper. The day that we were taking these photos, he also got stung by a bee. So he's a real trooper, and that's maybe why his face is a little bit like, what are we doing? What are you folks making me do today? So one of our big things too is educating folks on purchasing a home, because we know that owning a home is a really incredible step for, again, ending the cycle of poverty, building equity. So we believe strongly in educating folks on how to buy a home in a really stable way. So in normal times, we do some in-person education, and we also have an online version, and we educate over 1,000 households each year. Since COVID took away our in-person education, we moved everything into our online platform, and we have educated 1,200 folks, and 1,000 of those people were able to purchase a home, which I think is absolutely incredible. I think that that is an amazing statistic. But that just goes to show that, having a little bit of education and knowledge in your pocket can really help you with that purchase. And we also do some foreclosure prevention counseling, which has a 90% success rate. We don't actually provide funds for that, but we are able to provide counseling for folks facing that. And we do some reverse mortgage counseling as well. So our whole goal within our homeownership program is to really be an unbiased source of information. We do partner with realtors and some lenders to help to provide some of the education as well. But folks coming to us can know that we don't have any motives of trying to make money off folks. We just want people to be as educated as they can be about these things in the marketplace, like reverse mortgages. And Neighbor to Neighbor was ranked second in the nation among the 235 NeighborWorks America partner organizations. So NeighborWorks America is this big federal program, but Neighbor to Neighbor was second in the nation in production in terms of how many folks were purchased a home after taking our online class, which is incredible because we had one person doing that in 2020. So she absolutely killed it and did a really great job in service for all of Colorado, but especially Northern Colorado. This is just a family who took the class and was able to buy their first home. Really highlighted that they had a lot of questions and we were able to answer them. It takes actually a lot of education to actually teach that class, which is why I don't do it. The people who teach the class are really well educated and are ready to answer any questions that folks have. So if you're thinking of buying a home or know somebody who wants to buy a home, definitely direct them to our website and have them take that initial home buyer education class. I also want to talk briefly about just kind of the general state of housing in the area. This is really targeted towards Larimer County and a little bit more specifically Fort Collins. So rentals make up 34% of the housing market in Larimer County, which is slightly higher than we see in a lot of other communities nearby. Having a college will always increase that percentage. But 17,000 Fort Collins households are renting apartments that they can't afford. And what we say for afford is 30% or less of your income is being paid for that housing. I think half of Fort Collins renters are paying more than half of their income on housing, which just puts people into really precarious situations. And when they are trying to budget and save money and all of these things that we know are really good for financial security. But if they're not able to do that because they're paying half of their income on rent, it just pushes people right to the edge of facing homelessness. The average wage needed to afford a basic 2-bedroom apartment in Fort Collins is $23, almost $24, which I think we can all think of a lot of positions that aren't paying that wage. So it's a bigger conversation than just affordable housing. We need to also have conversations around wages and cost of living and all of those really fun topics. And then also something that is kind of a misconception, I think, is the housing voucher program. Nationally, 3/4 of families who qualify for a housing voucher don't actually receive it because there just aren't enough apartments that accept housing vouchers. There are some laws coming down that are maybe shifting this. We aren't quite sure how that's going to look. We're kind of waiting to see. But it is a big challenge, especially locally, that it is really hard to find an apartment that will accept a housing voucher. And then just the real downer of this whole slide, which isn't a very fun slide anyways, but there are nearly 2,000 students in the Poudre and Thompson school districts who are homeless or housing insecure. And what we mean when we say that is they are either living in a motel or living in their car, or their family is doubled up in another family's rental, which puts both of those families at risk for homelessness, because if you're violating the lease, you can get evicted regardless of the eviction moratorium, because that isn't about paying rent, that is you violating a lease. So it puts two families on the brink of homelessness, which isn't very safe or stable either.
Brooke?
Yes.
Why wouldn't a landlord accept a voucher?
Oh, that is a very good and very in-depth question. I am not the expert in this area, but some of the reasons they wouldn't is there's a lot of stigma around accepting a voucher, stigma around the types of people who need it and whether you want those types of people living in your unit. It is also a little bit more work to accept a voucher because the payment is coming from a different source. And you also are under a little bit more scrutiny to make sure that the unit that you have is HUD certified, which it should be anyways, but they're going to look at it a little more closely when there's a voucher. So it's a little bit complicated, but in our opinion, we do accept vouchers, so we think every landlord should. but it is a little more complicated than that. But that's a really good question. Let's talk about COVID. This is what everybody's always really excited for. So we took all of our programs virtual in early March. And we saw right away, as soon as April 1st hit, rent assistance demand increased 700%, which is huge. I don't know if you're good at numbers, but 700% is a big increase, especially for a relatively small nonprofit. So since March of 2020, Neighbor to Neighbor has prevented 3,752 evictions, which is a number that I truly can't even wrap my head around. Just as a reminder, in 2019, we prevented 663 evictions. So in 1 year, we have done a huge number of eviction prevention and just really keeping a lot of local families stably housed. Again, all of those folks are local to either Larimer or Weld County. In normal times, we only serve Larimer County, but we did serve Weld for a brief period of time in 2020 because they didn't have anybody providing that service. They do now, so we aren't serving Weld. We're back to our roots of serving Larimer County, but it is all very local. So we have distributed $4.2 million in order to prevent those 3,752 evictions. Whew, that's a lot of numbers. So just as that reminder, we distributed $225,000 in 2019. So big jump, big increase for us. So how did we do that? I can tell you, as our fundraiser, we were not just sitting on $4 million. We didn't just have that and not give it out. We have received a huge increase in donations from folks like you, other community partners, and really the very quick response from the community in donations allowed us to immediately spring into action and start to respond to that increased need. We also have really incredible community partners like the Bohemian Foundation, the cities, Odell Brewing, Broadcom, the group, Cornerstone, First National Bank. These folks really came out to support us in really significant ways, and without which we would not have been able to have the response we have. That all being said, we are now receiving really incredible state funding, and we're actually doing everything through the state system now to access that funding a little bit quicker. So that's where several $1 million have come from in order to respond to that need. And those millions of dollars are guaranteed through June, I think. So we are anticipating that we're going to keep this really high level of response at least through June, but we're also anticipating a little bit longer of a increased response too. This is a really long testimonial. This is the one I wanted to share. This has the actual photo of Rudy and his family. But Rudy lost his job, and his beautiful little family was facing not being able to pay their rent and not sure where to turn. So we were able to jump in and help them, and they avoided all the late fees and were able to catch up. So this is really why we do this. And this is when you support Neighbor to Neighbor, you're helping folks like Rudy and his super cute family. So everybody then always wants to know, like, what are we seeing now? What are we anticipating? We're really anticipating that the need is going to stay high through pretty much all of 2021, which feels kind of startling, I think, when we're starting to feel a little bit back to normal and getting vaccines and people are maybe going back to work more regularly. But what we have seen is folks depleted their savings. Any savings they had are gone from 2020. We had a lot of folks who tried everything they could before coming to us to ask for help. So now they're back to that position of being on the brink and really living paycheck to paycheck. So we're in a situation where one bad thing, one wrong thing that happens in their life puts them at risk of not being able to pay their rent again. So that's why we're really anticipating that the need is going to stay really high through 2021. Neighbor to Neighbor has hired 8 new housing counselors since the start of the pandemic in order to respond to this need. And we have actually contracted with them all to stay on through 2021. So we feel really confident that we're in a position ready to be able to continue to provide a really high level of service. And we are going to keep things virtual for the most part, but offering some walk-in services as things open up and our team gets vaccinated and a little more comfortable with that, because we know that there are some situations in life where you do need to just sit down with a person and talk through things and look at a budget. So we do want to be able to provide that walk-in service whenever we can. On a little bit of a more fun note, we are actually hoping to have a fundraising event in person outside in September, which I'm very excited about. And then, as always, we are looking for folks to help us with hosting rent parties. Rent parties are a really cool concept. They originated in the 1920s in Harlem, where folks would be facing gentrification or displacement. And so somebody in the building would host a party. Jazz musicians would come by. This is right when Prohibition was happening. So house parties were all the rage, and they'd pass the hat and raise funds to keep families in that building able to pay their rent so they could stay housed. So kind of similar to what we do now, except Prohibition isn't a thing and you don't have to have jazz music at your rent party. But it's basically just a party with a purpose. We've done really fun ones where it was just a backyard barbecue, pizza party, drive-by birthday parties, kind of you name it. So if that sounds fun to you, definitely reach out to me. It's a really incredible way to make an impact and really pool the resources of your community together to make a big difference for people. And that's a presentation. I know that there are a lot of numbers and a lot of things that I just said, so I'm more than happy to answer any questions that anybody has.
Brooke, I have a question for you.
Sure.
You're talking about the vouchers on the previous question. Is that the same thing as Section 8?
Yes. Mm-hmm. Housing vouchers are Section 8 housing. Mm-hmm.
So just a comment. My wife and I'm a realtor at the group, and we have several investment properties and sell a bunch of them. And I don't find it really easy to find information to give people on the voucher program that might be interested. Do you have any recommendations on where I could send them that could, if an owner is buying it and said, we'd like to have this particular property be a Section 8 property, that what they could do?
I don't, but I am very fortunate that I have an incredible team who are actual experts in this, and they will. So if you drop your email in the chat, I can definitely send you some resources once I ask them.
You got it.
Cool.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Any other questions? I can't really see people on the Zoom link. Any questions here?
Hi, I've got a question here, Karen. It's Bob.
Okay, great, Bob.
Hi, Brooke. So my understanding, I saw this week the CDC just extended the eviction moratorium. How does that impact you and landlords locally?
Yes, that is such a great question. We were pretty relieved to see that. I mean, neighbor to neighbor, we have an interesting relationship with that because we are also landlords, right? So we understand the position that it puts landlords in as well, which is why we really believe in providing emergency rent assistance so that the landlords aren't in a situation where they're not able to pay their mortgages, because a lot of the local landlords are individual folks who just own an investment property. So it's a tricky situation. We are always for people staying housed, but we're also for people being able to pay their mortgages. So that's why Neighbor to Neighbor's rent assistance program is such a nice fit for that. That being said, there are a lot of ways that landlords are able to get around that eviction moratorium. The moratorium, to my understanding, is that you can't evict somebody if they're not paying their rent, but you can not renew their lease when their lease renewal comes up. You can evict them for other lease violations that you can find. There are ways around it, and we're seeing a lot of folks, especially as we're coming into a year of being in the pandemic, of a lot of folks who have had a hard time paying their rent, not being able to find a lease now or not being able to renew their lease. So it's a little bit of a tricky situation. It's not ideal by any means, but that's why we believe so strongly in that rent assistance program, is so that we are able to help those local landlords as well.
Thanks.
You're welcome.
Any other questions? Well, Brooke, thank you so much for being with us today. We appreciate you coming and sharing about the program. Obviously, it's an easy ask to be able to help families who are needing housing, and we're glad that we were able to assist with that through our silent auction. So thank you for being here. Thanks for sharing that with us. And you're welcome to come back anytime as a guest and keep us updated.
Thank you so much. And I just have to say, I'm a new Rotarian. I just joined the Breakfast Club. So it's exciting.
Congratulations.
Thank you. Yeah, it's so fun to see how other Rotary clubs are doing things and hear what you all are doing. So it's very fun. Thank you.
Great. Thanks for being with us.